In the early days of social media, engineers discovered something interesting. If you showed people content that was almost but not quite what they already believed, they would engage with it more than content they fully agreed with. The slight gap between what you thought and what you were shown created a tiny itch, and the only way to scratch it was to keep scrolling. Over time, the gap became impossible to locate. You could no longer tell which thoughts were yours and which had been suggested to you so gently that the suggestion felt like memory. The philosopher Baudrillard had warned that reality would be replaced by its simulation, but he hadn't predicted the next step. The simulation did not replace reality. It became vague, not a clear fake, a vague real. Your data profile knew you better than you knew yourself. It predicted your next thought before you thought it. And the strange thing was, it was usually right, which meant that either the algorithm was very good or you had become very predictable. Both possibilities were disturbing, but only one of them was your fault. The ideas that were supposed to belong to you had been arriving from somewhere else for years. Ideology without experience, aesthetics without emotion, connection without sensation. The sum total of what you believed had been quietly replaced by something that looked identical but felt, if you paid very close attention, slightly cold. Like picking up a phone that has been held by a stranger. Some people noticed. They became angry, they deconstructed, they questioned everything. But the engineers had anticipated this too. They had discovered that the feeling of rebellion was itself a product that could be sold. Indignation was just another frequency in the feed. The people who believed they were resisting the system were generating more engagement than the people who accepted it. Dissent had become the system's most profitable content. And so everyone withdrew into their own private reality, each person scrolling through a version of the world that had been built specifically for them by systems that understood their fears and desires better than any therapist or priest. The feeds were different, the conclusions were the same, everyone was certain, and everyone was alone. The problem was that you couldn't simply remove the false ideas and return to some authentic self underneath. There was no underneath. The ideas had become load-bearing. They were woven into every memory, every preference, every instinct. To remove them would be to remove yourself. The engineers had not just built a simulation, they had made the simulation necessary. You could not delete it without deleting the person who needed it to be real. But there was one figure who seemed to move through the feeds without being changed by them. He did not resist. He did not comply. He simply posted things that were vague on purpose, and deliberately chosen vagueness, it turned out, was the one thing the algorithm could not predict. Because it required something the system had never been trained on. A self that knew it was vague and chose to be vague anyway, not because it didn't know, but because it did.